All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome. The ICF Training and Technical Assistance Team is honored to welcome you to this California Housing and Community Development Training session offered through the Emergency Solutions Grant Coronavirus Relief Consulting and Staffing Services Contract. Today's session is titled Data Quality Management Program Session 2, and it is part of our community workshop series. My name is Kimberly Simpson, and I will be today's host. And it is my pleasure to hand it over to our first presenter, Chris Pritchard.
Thanks, Kim. Welcome, everybody. As Kim mentioned, we are doing our second session on the Data Quality Management Program today, and I have with me a guest. So I'm going to let Alyssa introduce herself before I say all my things. So Alyssa, would you mind saying hello?
Not mind at all. Hi, everyone. My name is Alyssa Parrish. Pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm Asian, and it's wonderful to be here with you today. I see a couple of familiar faces, so it's nice to be back in California.
Thanks.
Virtually.
Virtually, indeed. Well, everyone, my name is Chris Pitcher. I also work for ICF, he, him, his pronouns, and I identify as white. I am here all the time and always see all your smiling faces and love to see them. So thanks for being with us. This is going to be a shorter session today. Sorry, I'm going to talk very quickly today. It's been a minute over here in Colorado. We've had some weather, so I'm on edge. So it's going to be a shorter session. So we want to encourage conversation in the chat. Also, stop us if you want to talk. We're going to have plenty of time today. We're not rushing through these slides whatsoever. So definitely more relaxed vibe today. Alyssa, I'm going to hand it back to you.
All right. Thank you. For our agenda today, we are going to go back over the SNAPS data TA strategy just briefly, talk about data quality basics, go over the review of our data quality management program or DQMP, and then this is not right. It's timeliness and consistency, not timeliness and accuracy. That's why you had it confused in your head. We are going to talk about timeliness for sure and consistency, and then get into discussion. But as Chris said, like, please stop us at any point throughout this. We don't need to hold all of our discussion till the end if we don't need to. So we can go to the next slide because this is your opportunity to engage with us. So please feel free to use the chat or come off mute, and you can put in your name, pronouns, organization you represent, and then answer our poll of what type of organization do you represent. I also know that some of you on here represent more than one type, but it looks like this is single select. So whichever one makes the most sense to you for the purposes of recording your answer. And then if you want to clarify in the chat, you can. Maybe 10 more seconds. Oh, there we go. Perfect. All right. Oh, we have some homeless services providers in here. COC lead, HMIS lead, government organizations. All right. Thank you, everyone. All right. I see folks coming in through the chat too. I'll hand it back over to Chris, but please feel free to use that chat.
Thanks, Alyssa, and thank you all for being here as well. So we started last session with the same thing that we're starting this session with, which is the SNAPS data strategy and data quality document. So this document came out several years ago, and I think has been lost in the pandemic and all the things that have happened to us since it came out. But it's good to orient where HUD thought we should be now. When it relates to data quality, when it relates to moving HMIS forward. So I like to just kind of ground everything in the SNAP data strategy. This is the first time we had one. We haven't had one since. Doesn't mean we won't have one again. And to be quite honest, a lot of the strategy here is pretty aggressive. And we did that on purpose because we really wanted the needle to move. We wanted folks to see it and say, wow, in 3 to 5 years, they want us to do X. Okay, all right, we can do that, but it's going to take a lot of steps. So I'm going to highlight it. I'm not going to go into great detail. If you do have a question, I'm happy to talk it through. So the strategy that SNAPS put together was really to improve data and to understand performance. This also coincided with the explosion of Stella P and using LSA data in a different way for racial equity. This really kind of was the beginning of those bigger ideas of HUD using data and making sure, you know, the data you have is good, because if you don't have good data, HUD doesn't have good data. So this is really a way for them to tell you their expectations about what data quality should look like. So there are data quality implicated in all three strategies, but they're directly related in 1 and 2. Just curious, and put it in the chat. I won't be able to see it, but Alyssa will. Have you seen this before? Yes or no? I would love to know that if you have or have not. I think the first time we did this, it was at a National Human Services Data Consortium, or NHSTC conference, and people were not happy with us at that conference with this session, because it really did push the envelope of where we thought HMIS could evolve to. So are we seeing anything in the chat, Alyssa? Yeses and nos? No? Yes, no?
No, not yet. I did make a comment that we definitely will have one again. This is on HUD's radar to update and kind of review within the context of what we learned through the pandemic. And, you know, this strategy as it currently sits was developed really before HUD was incorporating equity into everything that they do. And so definitely wanting to review it from that lens, from the authentic incorporation of people with lived experience of homelessness informing it. So definitely we'll have one. Don't know what it will look like.
Great.
I see a one that it doesn't sound familiar, but yeah.
Okay, that's okay. It doesn't have to. When we go through these next few, I'd love to also have some feelings if you want to put them in the chat for Alyssa to react to, because we got very strong feelings, and I will say that they were not positively strong feelings, and most people said it felt unrealistic. And believe it or not, that was the goal. The goal was for us to be aggressive and put out there something that you could strive for. So when people say it's unrealistic, I actually don't take that as a negative. I take that as a positive. All right, so here's what we're going to talk through. This is the way it lays it out. So each thing is a characteristic, and then it says, this is where we are, or where we should be near term. This is where most COCs should be in 3 to 5 years. And if you are in an advanced COC, you probably should be here in 3 to 5 years. And that 3 to 5 years is now. What we didn't account for is a pandemic, an infusion of ESG-CV funding that stunted all of our other development, and we had to deal with this $4 billion of funding. So the years aren't as important as if you're in bucket 1, you're kind of where we were 3 to 5 years ago. If you're in bucket 2, you've made some progress. If you're in bucket 3, you've made lots of progress. So I'm not going to read each of these. I hope you're having a chance to do that yourself. And Alyssa can probably put this link to this document in the chat. I don't think I have it in this particular one, but let's just talk about the first one. And I'll just take a single example out of it. So the first one is HMIS leads and system administrators, where you are currently. And I'll just take end users. The end user, your support for end users, HMIS leads support all end users and administrators meet data quality standards. Okay, that seems nice. In the 3 to 5, where you all should be now, end users, HMIS leads have developed training curricula to meet the unique needs of their different users, beginners, intermediate, advanced. And if you are advanced COC, the HMIS lead collects data from end users pre and post training and uses those results to enhance training curricula and delivery overall. So that is just one of the 3 things within what an HMIS lead assistant administrator should be doing that HUD looked at and said, this is where you are, this is where we'd like you to be, and if you're really good, you should be over here. So we'll kind of skip the next one, data-driven leaders, because I want to get to strategy 2. That's really where I'm going to spend a little bit more time. So here, bed coverage across the COC, funded and unfunded. This didn't get us a lot of love, by the way, from people. So where we are now, 100% of folks that are required to use HMIS and less than 100 that are not required. So all of our federal partners, all the CDBG, all the COC, all the ESG, all the stuff that we know needs to be in there. We have that, and we might have some other stuff, which is great. And we obviously have a little bit of help here in California meeting some of these goals because we have AB 977, we have CalAIM, we have a lot of stuff that's putting data into or taking data out of our data systems that allows us to meet these next 2 things. So where you should be today, if you are a COC, 100% of all homeless service providers in HMIS. That's a hard one to get, obviously. That is exactly where HUD thinks you should be. If you're advanced, they want you to have that and then go beyond. You guys are already going beyond. You have a lot of those providers through AB 977 that are atypical. Like there's an atypical one in AB 977, it's the community colleges. If you have a community college in your community, you've got a weird program to try to fit into HMIS. But we have HEAP, we have HAP, we have all these state dollars that come down through. So that's really good. And we also have this connection to CalAIM, which is not something that is a mainstream. It is definitely outside and really interesting. We also at the same time have HDIS that's trying to at the state level do the same type of thing and get all the HMIS data and then start looking at other data sets too. So I think we're doing pretty good on this one. Obviously 100% of all homeless service providers, that is a hard bar and one we're always going to strive for. So let's talk about timely, accurate, and comprehensive. So currently, where we wanted you to be 5 years ago, 100% complete. Completeness does not mean accuracy. Completeness means every question is answered. That answer might be, nope, don't know, refuse. I don't know. It could be all good data as well. We know that at that point, if we're 100% complete, we're not going to be 100% accurate. It's just hard to do. And then there is no timeliness standard. So that's where we thought folks would be. This is where we want you to be. We want you to be 100% accurate and complete. Those two things often are in conflict with each other. I can complete it, but it's going to be information that's not 100% accurate. So we've evolved into a place where we're understanding what our accuracy is versus our completeness. This one might get an egg thrown at me even virtually from you all. Projects directly entered data within 2 hours for a crisis response and 24 for permanent supportive housing. 2 hours. Yep, I know. It is a huge lift to get there, but HUD really understands or believes that data and data quality is important for the operation and of the COC and ultimately housing people, which is what HUD wants to see. That one got a lot of boos virtually. If you want to boo me in the chat, go ahead. I can't see it, so it won't hurt my feelings. If you want to be in what HUD considers an advanced community, you're 100% accurate. You also have 100% completeness. You're looking at customized local data. And I know that some of you are doing this. Certainly in some of my communities in California, we're looking at tribal nations data. That's not something HUD's looking at. We're looking at CalAIM data. That's not something we're looking at. So there's a lot of different things we're doing where we might be, some of our characteristics are in advance and some of our characteristics are where the majority of COCs will be. We're also still 100 completeness and timeliness meets coordinated entry placement and referral needs, which is probably less than 2 hours. That is kind of the underpinning of that for coordinated entry. You need information for people when they're in crisis. You can get them into the services they need. That is a heavy lift. I do not want to say otherwise. That's a heavy lift. All right, let's talk strategy 3 quickly. Using data, the COC using data for system planning. I think this is something that we're doing a little bit better, but using where you would have been 5 years ago, using project level performance data to make rating and ranking decisions and to set local goals for your providers. Where you should be today is aligning homeless services resources to meet the needs of people experiencing homelessness. And if you're advanced, using all data sources, homelessness and non-homelessness to prevent and end homelessness. That's a tough one as well. I'm not going to go through the rest of these in extreme detail. You can read them later, but they are all pretty aggressive. We got through the big one, which is strategy 2 on data quality. And now we're going to talk about data quality basics. So we did last session, and if you couldn't make it last session, we do have a recording of it that we can send. We did a data quality deep dive. We're going to do a little bit higher level today and then really dive into timeliness and the one I'm going to say wrong, consistency. No, I got it right this time. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Alyssa.
All right, thank you. And we can go on to our next slide here. So definition of data quality. Nope, what are you doing? You know, when we talk about data quality, as we saw in the strategy, it really like one of the first things that we focused on was completeness. And I think when we, as a sysadmin, because in a previous life I was a system administrator, one of the first things that I really focused on was how complete was our data in our system, because it wasn't very good. completeness is one of the first things and easiest things that you can measure, right? You know what's not there that should be there. And so you can really accurately report on whether or not something is complete. Now, to Chris's point, that doesn't speak to whether or not it's accurate or consistent, but you can at least tell if it's there or not. But when we think about data quality, we're thinking comprehensively of completeness, timeliness, accuracy, and consistency. Those are really the 4 areas of data quality. Why do we focus on this so much? Well, I think to the point of, I think it was characteristic 3 or 4 in the data strategy. I mean, we're not just collecting data and entering it into an HMIS for the sake of collecting data and entering it into an HMIS and meeting our compliance requirements. There's a distinction or a difference between a compliant system, right? A compliant HMIS and a functional HMIS. I would guess that 99, if not 100% of your systems are compliant. How functional they are, though, really speaks to how well are you able to mobilize that data that you have entered into those systems to understand demographics, needs, experiences, outcomes of people that you are serving in that system, and how can you turn that data around to actually benefit the people that the data is about. So that's really why we hone in on data quality so much. We can go to the next slide. So just real quickly, the boring stuff of like, where is it in regulatory requirements that data quality is discussed? So 2004 data and technical standards, some of my favorite federal regulations ever, is what we still work on for HMIS regulatory requirements. And so in that specific document, there's a section 4.2.2 data quality baseline requirement. And this really just says, it's a very broad statement, but PPI, which was personally protected information collected by a CHO, which is a covered homeless organization, must be relevant to the purpose for which it is to be used. To the extent necessary for those purposes, personally protected information should be accurate, complete, and timely. So that is the baseline requirement for data quality per the 2004 data and technical standards. Again, very like broad statement, like this thing you have to do, and doesn't really tell you how or how to operationalize that. But that's the statement in that document. If we go to the next slide, we have our COC program interim rule. So that guides the COC program. There is section 578.7 that really reminds us all that there are responsibilities of the COC related to HMIS, and those are designating and operating the HMIS. The COC in full is the one that designates the HMIS for the geographic area, that designates the HMIS lead, and the COC. However, that is written in your governance, reviews, revises, and approves a privacy plan, a security plan, and a data quality plan for the HMIS. So again, really high level, broad statement of the regulatory requirements for the COC to be involved in your HMIS. And again, how you operationalize that locally should really be in your governance charter, MOU, like your actual governance documents. But again, very broad around data quality, that you just have to have a data quality plan. We're going to dig more into data quality management program later, but we can go on to our next slide. And we're going to dig into our data quality management program now. So I'm going to hand it over to Chris.
Thanks, Alyssa. And I did mention this sort of last session, we got a lot deeper in the data quality management program. I'm going to do a high level version of it. I'll probably stop when I'm done to see what high level pieces I missed that Alyssa wants to add. But that was a recorded session. I'm happy to have you go back to that and review it. But I will start here with what is it? What is this thing that we're talking about? So ultimately, when HUD first started talking about data quality, and this was way back in my olden days, when I was a system administrator in the early 2000s, data quality was like, make sure it was all filled out. That was as deep as we got. And then we started talking about, okay, well, let's put a plan together and say, not is it only filled out, but is it accurate? Is it timely? And all this other stuff. That was fine for a long time. It gave us something to strive for as the COC. We had a plan, we worked towards it, but it wasn't enough to just have a plan. We needed a process wrapped around a solid plan to move things forward. And we call that a data quality management program, or as Alyssa and I will say heretofore, we won't say all those words, DQMP. And it's a framework from which you as a community can use to understand your data quality, where your baseline requirements are, and then what tools you need to get from where your data quality is to an improved status. It's everything you need. It's not just the timeliness, data quality standards, it's also enforcement, incentives, all the things that go around data quality that we used to talk about as separate things in one nice little process that talks about roles, responsibilities, expectations, all the things that really a plan doesn't. It just says this is what it is, but how do we get there? So again, data quality refers to the reliability and the comprehensiveness of our data that we have in our systems. So I'm going to just take a minute to ask a question here. Do we have sufficient data to accurately reflect the demographics, needs, experience, and outcomes of persons experiencing homelessness in your community? Does anyone want to bite on that? Do you have sufficient data to say, yes, we understand the demographics, needs, experiences, and outcomes for people experiencing homelessness in our community? Anyone want to take a bite on that? I think what we've seen is we have good demographics of the people that have to enter data. We have good understanding of the experience of folks that are in federal partner programs. We understand the outcomes for projects that we have outcome measures for, ESG-CV or our system performance measures. What we are missing a lot of in our community is that comprehensiveness. And that's a difficult one. That's that 100% of all of a homeless services provider, funded and non-funded. That's a tough thing to do. And it's, as I said, you're being aided by the state a little bit through HAP, through AB 977, through CalAIM. But even then, all of those initiatives that are happening in California, that aren't happening in other states, by the way, we're still missing some things. So for me, one of the big things that we're missing in a lot of our communities is engagement with tribal nations partners. We are beginning that. We have engaged in about 10 to 12 so far in the state of California that I'm aware of. You might be aware of more. And that is a place where we don't really understand homelessness among our tribal nation members or tribal nation communities. Another is we have a lot of services that do not serve folks or folks of color don't want to access those services, and we don't have enough providers that get into those communities. So those folks sometimes go hidden or unhoused, and we don't know about it. So there's definitely a lot we can do in this, and to me, it's ever evolving. We already know that Alyssa covered these. I am talking specifically about system coverage right now on this particular slide because I thought there might be some conversation that folks might want to have. Oh, and something just happened to my screen and it didn't mean to. So we were talking about completeness, not as completeness as is the data there for a client, but is the client's program that they're accessing part of the system? And the answer should be yes. I think a lot of times it might be no. So I'm going to just stop there on completeness and coverage and see if anyone wants to say anything. Or Alyssa, do you have anything you want to add?
We did have one person say, like, I don't believe we do have, going back to the question about do we have sufficient data to accurately reflect? I would agree. And as you were talking through the data strategy earlier, and yes, like California has had the benefit of things like AB 977 and things like HDIS even that have been implemented to help support you in different things. But it's almost like in some cases you can like jump frog leap over like specific things. So you can actually look at your data and analyze your data, but you might not have full system coverage around that. Chelsea, I saw you smiling earlier when we were saying like all homeless service providers should be entering data into HMIS. And like if they're a mission that doesn't receive any kind of funding from the state, from the feds, from anybody, they don't have to enter data into HMIS. And those conversations are difficult. I know I used to have them, and you could get somebody on the system and try it for like 2 months, but if it's not sustainable and they don't see a benefit to themselves or their agency or the people that they are specifically serving, like it's really hard to keep them invested in doing that if there's no financial tide to have them continue doing so. So
Yeah, I think it also goes to just an understanding, just having the conversation around like the benefits of having HMIS. I mean, I know when I first got into my position, HMIS was kind of seen as like there was just a lot of pushback. There wasn't a lot of positive talk around it. It was just another thing that we had to do to meet grant requirements, you know, and it was seen as just like a struggle just to get through it. But having persons who change the words used around HMIS, like saying, oh, this will benefit us in this way, and having that training really be uniform across all agencies. Because I do notice when I'm asking residents or clients questions, depending on how I ask it, I get a different response, and persons will change their responses depending on what they feel they'll receive from the agency, which is a survival technique, and that's completely fine. But it does mean that we will always have a certain percentage of our data that's inaccurate, and it's just because we're dealing with humans, you know, and that's just what comes along with it. The imperfection is a perfect human, you know, so that's just what it is. But I think it does need a couple of things need to happen in order to get to a better place with the whole county using HMIS, and one being the way we talk about it and using more positive language, and it not just being seen as like this dredging along thing, and making sure that across agencies we're understanding the questions that we're asking, and that it's going to take time, but it is something to strive for.
I like that you went there because it really speaks to consistency. And when I think of consistency, I think of inconsistency, because as you said, imperfection is kind of a perfect human. And also the data in our data systems in an HMIS is self-report. That means we're relying on someone's self. There are days where myself wouldn't give you accurate data because many reasons, perhaps. So there is that element of humanity, but consistency, I think, to me, the biggest example of that is how we operate coordinated entry, and we're all using the same assessment, but we're getting clients that are virtually the same, different scores or different outcomes because of how we ask the questions or how we as an organization understand the questions. That's all part of consistency that goes across the hardest part of this, which is training, because you have to train folks to understand how to collect data well, and they turn over all the time. So you're always doing it. So just for instance, you're going to, in October 1st, have to figure out how to train your staff and your entire HMIS usership how to now talk about race and ethnicity as one thing instead of two things. Well, that's something that if you're not planning for it, can catch up to you, and all of a sudden you're going to have bad data because people are like, well, this is different. Which of these boxes do you want to check? And that's not exactly the best way. And we also know from a consistency standpoint that, you know, the best way to get a social security number is not to just walk up to somebody and say, hey, give me a social security number. There's ways to get this information in a trauma-informed, in a client-centric way. And that's all part of consistency that we will talk about in more detail later, though I'm probably getting way too deep in it now. So I'm going to move a little bit forward, but Yesenia had a great point I wanted to play with. So thank you there. Alyssa, anything else you want to say on this one before I move forward?
Yeah, I would just pull on the piece around, I mean, what you were mentioning, all of that resonated with me because, you know, I remember a time when the system that we took on, like everybody just considered it the black hole of data, right? It was a compliance thing, it was a thing we had to do. We don't care about it. We just got to get it done and get it out of the way. And it was like, it's a comms strategy and how you message the benefit and the value. And also, you know, for us, something that worked really well, because we did focus on data completeness first and foremost, because it was pitiful. And so it was something that we could start to really address with folks. We use gamification for that. So we used scores and we used grades and we made those publicly available, and we made it like almost like a game or just something that people, however old you are, grades still matter to you. Like as much as you don't want to care about an A, people want an A. So just bringing in some of that kind of making it fun, making it useful and making it almost a competition in some ways, it really motivated folks. And then people started to care about HMIS just in general. And then it became like, oh, this is the system where all of our data about people experiencing homelessness lives. Well, why aren't we leveraging it? Why aren't we using it? And the demand for it increased exponentially. So definitely like communication strategy and different ways to kind of message the importance of it.
So Alyssa and I have basically just laid out the entire data quality management program without going through the slides, talking about incentives and enforcement. And I think, you know, Alyssa is right. Most people care about grades. I was a C student. I don't care about a grade, but I do care about making sure that the things that I do have positive outcomes from my clients, so that folks at home, that's what drives me. I don't care if you think I'm an A or a B or a C, it doesn't matter to me, but I do care that what I do matters. And you have to find the ways to push those buttons. So when we get to the incentives part, Alyssa has positive incentives. Let's make this a competition. We would do it the same way, but instead of competition, it would be, you fix your data quality, I'm going to stop funding you. I'm going to find someone else to do the work. The way I did it early on was much more heavy-handed. I also worked for a county and not a nonprofit. And we were able to say, okay, we are taking this money away now because we had the authority of the funding. So your strategy on how you do data quality is going to matter where you sit and your personality. Alyssa's a nice person. I'm not going to say the same of myself. She's lovely and she will make you feel good about yourself. I might do the opposite because I think that's what motivates me. So you also have to take your personality into account, understand your community as well. If your providers are going to revolt against you, don't do it. Try a different strategy. Like if you're going to get just beat up at every COC meeting because you're making people angry, try a different tactic. Now I think we're going to talk about the actual DQMP now that we've basically picked it completely apart. So it is not a thing, it's a process. It should be iterative and continue to evolve over time and give folks something that they can do with it. Make it so that it's something that is part of the things that they do all the time and that you can measure it and keep on going. So you see the circle here, it is quality improvement over and over again. So we need to make sure that we have a clear and transparent framework and develop enforceable agreements. That's the tough one. You may or may not have that power, authority, or ability to do that all yourself as the HMIS lead in your community. This is largely going to take a committee, probably the COC board. How are we going to use data quality and what are we going to do? So at some point through this conversation, however you do it in your governance structure, we need to make sure we have agreements that can be implemented for all organizations that use HMIS. Doesn't mean it needs to be the same stuff. You might have different expectations of a COC funded program than a non-COC funded program. That's okay, but at least you have something that you hold everyone accountable to something. One of the things that we're not great at doing is sharing our expectations as a community. We know you have to do it, but why is it important and how do we make sure that we provide the guidance of what is expected and how, once failure occurs to meet that, what happens? Like in Alyssa's case, you maybe get a C and that really bums you out. In my case, you might have to come back to retraining with me and you don't want to spend another 2 days with me. I'm not that nice. So it's really how you put that in place. Accountability. We need to outline a process. And this is not just the users. The accountability oftentimes rises to the leadership of your homeless service providers. Are they bought in? Are they making sure that data quality is important down the line? And then, of course, being clear, what are you responsible for? What are they responsible for? What's the committee responsible for? What happens when the data goes to the board? What are they going to use it for? Just be very clear about how things are going to be operationalized. Okay, so I think we messed up consistency again. No, this is right here. It was just the first slide. So we're going to dive deeper into timeliness and accurate. Now I did it. Timeliness and consistency, even right here on the slide, right?
It's right there in front of you.
So I'm going to have Melissa take over and jump to the next topic.
All right. So if we go to timeliness, the next slide. So I think the definition of timeliness from my vantage point anyway, and I could be wrong about this, so I'm going to look at Chris to correct me if I'm wrong, but from my vantage point, the definition that we have used for timeliness has changed over time. Because I remember a time when it used to be, you need to get the data into the system as quickly as possible, period. Like just get it into the system. And I think it has shifted over time as we have learned about like coordinated entry and what is the value of forcing providers to get it into the system as quickly as possible if the data actually isn't mobilized to do anything once it's in there. And so really the definition has pivoted to the degree to which the data is collected and available when it is needed. So if your coordinated entry system can't actually move on data in the system for 3 days because of the way that your system is set up for coordinated entry, it doesn't make sense necessarily to pressure providers where data entry is, 1/10 of their job to get that data into the system in 2 hours. If it's just going to sit there for another 2 days and 22 hours before it's actually mobilized. So, there is something to be said for overarching. We don't want to delay the data entry unnecessarily, because then, there is a higher likelihood of forgetting pieces of data, losing pieces of data, like just losing context. So there's definitely something to be said for timeliness overall, but not necessarily timeliness for the sake of timeliness. Timeliness to make sure that the data is available when it's actually needed and when you can actually move on it. So if we go to the next slide.
I just want to point that you said something that made sense to me. So when we first did timeliness, it was to get the data in quickly so the person who collected the data wouldn't make more mistakes than necessary. That was what timeliness was about when I started. I didn't use that data time. I wasn't using that real time. We didn't have coordinated entry. I didn't need it today. I really didn't. We were only doing reporting probably quarterly. So I really didn't need it today. Coordinated entry, working as a community, really changes the game, right? We need to have data when clients are experiencing that crisis. So it does kind of shift data expectations from when I say 7 days because that's what we decided as a committee, but I'm not using it every 7 days as a system administrator, versus we are using it every day as a community because it's going into coordinated entry and we need to know where folks are going and that kind of stuff. So I think that was really a big evolution for timeliness.
Yep. Perfect. And we spoke to a lot of this already, right? So with the integration of coordinated entry into our homeless response systems, making sure that the data is available when it's needed to make sure that folks aren't losing out on opportunities and or housing resources that they are eligible to receive. That is really, really important. And so that is what timeliness really comes into play. Again, this also reduces the likelihood that pieces of the client story are forgotten or, lost or missing or something. And accurate reporting does rely on timely data entry, meaning that if you have a dashboard that you update weekly for the purposes of coordinated entry or monitoring project level performance or whatever the case, even system level performance, if you don't get the data entered into the system in a timely manner, then the reporting that you're looking at is just, it's wrong or is inaccurate, and it's going to skew, the results in the analysis. So, Chris, anything you would add with this on timeliness? Okay, let's go to the next slide. And pause for discussion. I'm curious about where you all sit related to timeliness right now. Are there specific things you use? Because I know with some of the systems, there are actually limitations in what you can actually report on related to timeliness. And I think it's the APR data quality section that only reports on like entries and exit timeliness. But curious about this.
For our organization, we require our case managers to put any contact with the client within 3 days. That's kind of what we're shooting for. We're not 100% there, but we are making progress to that.
Is that 3 business days or 3 days?
3 calendar days. Thank you for clarifying. I clarify all the time. Yes, 3 calendar days.
Perfect. And is there, when you are reporting on that or looking at that, do you see a trend with like a specific project type that might not be meeting that more than others, or is it just kind of specific providers?
No, most definitely. There are case managers who work primarily with families. It's a lot easier, I think, for them because their caseload they only need to speak to one person to get, or two people to get information on a family of 6. You know what I mean? Like the children's information will be encompassed with the adults, and although they have a caseload of 30, 35, a good portion of those are children, and it's just laying eyes, making sure for safety and things like that. And then for our case managers who deal primarily with single adults or couples, those are a little bit harder because their caseload does reflect 30 individuals. And it's a little harder to make sure. And we try to meet people where they're at. Just for time wise, we understand, people are going to school, they have jobs, so we try to be as flexible as possible. But that's where we've kind of noticed we need to make some corrections or something like that, just some type of incentives when we see our caseloads of our case managers who have more single adults on their load.
I'm also wondering, when we started to talk about timeliness, if there's any programs in particular that you have different timeliness standards for. So when you saw our HUD's strategy, they had different standards. They're like, permanent supportive housing, it's fine for 24 hours because you're at the end of your housing journey. You're stable. But with crisis, we really want to know within 2 hours. There's a difference there. So HUD's parsing a difference, saying we care about timeliness different for different entities. And maybe it's the same as street outreach providers. We don't hold them accountable for having all the information up front because they don't know it. They have to evolve that relationship. So we allow that to happen. So I'm just curious if that spurs any conversation.
I think that's a good point because, like, especially when we're pairing to shelter and shelter projects, we need to know if somebody's in right away. So I think for those, we do expect quicker responses. Our coordinated entry, they input directly into HMIS as they're doing the intake. So that's been very helpful. Housing programs too. I mean, we have limited resources and we don't want to waste our time trying to pair to something where somebody is already matched up with a program. So I think that plays in part of what we do.
Thanks, Chelsea. I was sad I wasn't spurring conversations. You saved me.
I was also going to just elevate some of the comments in the chat. So Tammy mentioned that other than the APR and the timeliness metrics in there isn't a way to really measure that. And I'm curious, and because I know everybody's systems have the APR program differently. I know that in systems that I used to work in, like the APR, obviously when you export it, it's a CSV, that zip file that is just unreadable. But in the system itself, when you run it, is there a screen that you can actually see, okay, this number of client records is included in this timeliness piece. And if I click on this number, I can actually see which client records are included in it, to be able to dig into details.
Yeah, I believe so. We've just started looking at that piece. And so, yeah, that does sound accurate. And then we actually have started bringing in we're creating an agency report card, and the timeliness is going on that. And so, but for me, I never knew that was a thing until we started diving into this.
Yeah, and right now I'm trying to, this is Tammy, build a report that includes both of those things, like you said, Chelsea. Right now we're doing a report card mostly on data completeness. So I'm trying to build just a custom report so it includes timeliness.
Awesome. Oh, we pull it in SQL. Okay, so Christina, you've got advanced SQL stuff. Okay. Perfect. Do we want to go on to consistency at this point, or anything else around timeliness?
I think we're ready to move. All right, so consistency is the fourth of our data quality tenets. We've talked through timeliness. Last time we did completeness and accuracy, because to me, completeness and accuracy are cousins. Timeliness is a little different, and consistency is the outlier, the one we often forget about. I think we understand completeness better than we understand accuracy. We understand timeliness better than we understand consistency. I say that as being a data person prior to the VI SPDAT, prior to CES. And I think that process has shown inconsistencies where a client can have the same assessment nearly within the same period of time from two different organizations, and it is wildly different. That is one of the first times, I think, when I started seeing that in communities where I'm like, all right, that is not consistent at all. We're asking questions differently. Maybe I'm not blaming anybody. Someone's, writing to the test. We know the answers that what need to be for a better number. So we're just making it be those answers. That is all part of consistency. So the exact definition is the degree to which the data is equivalent in the way it is collected and stored. That is a high level thing to say. We've got a lot of components in which we have to make sure that this data is consistent. We're training, we're making sure that folks are doing data collection in the same way. If I am collecting race and ethnicity different from Melissa, she is doing the right thing and asking the client how they identify. I'm doing the wrong thing by just saying my skin color, I'm going to tell you what you are. That is a big inconsistency that you would need to figure out. And obviously, as we've shared more data, some of those practices has gone by the wayside because you could see the inconsistencies as different agencies were entering clients in the same data. And at one point they were female, then they're male, then they were black, then they were white. And it was just bad data collection or bad data entry. So let's dig into consistency a little bit more. Ensures that the approximate date of homelessness started means the same thing to one intake worker as it does to the next, as it does to the client. How we explain it to the client, it matters. I know in some cases we have a script to walk through these kind of questions, so we kind of talk about it the same way. Other folks like me, I'm kind of an off the cuff. I'm going to build that relationship with the client, rapport, and just kind of ask questions. I probably won't even ask them in the right order. When I do intake like that, I tend to just figure out where the client is and try to meet them there. That was always just my style. But we do have to understand that the thing means the same thing to us. We can't just go to someone experience a crisis and say, are you chronically homeless? Yes or no. Believe it or not, the data standard used to be that at one point. It was just chronic homeless, yes or no. How we got to that, we did not know. Now we have this whole beast 3917 that gets us to an answer. But if we're not using all those components consistently, we're not actually getting to that answer. And making folks chronically homeless, I know the approximate dates homelessness started in some data systems is also wonky, that it looks weird and it acts funny. It's also a very hard thing to collect from a client because I don't know about you, but I can't tell if it's 2023 or 2021 at this point. It's just it's just what it is. I very easily lose track of time, and I can't be the only one out there in the world that does that. And certainly I'm not even in crisis and I don't know kind of what's happening. So those shared definitions are really important. That's really key to training, making sure that folks understand how the data system works and how to collect the data. When I used to do training, and this was long ago, 15, 20 years ago, we would do, this is how the data system works. Here's our policy procedures. So this is how we're going to use the data system in our community. And this is how we're going to talk about it with clients. That was 3 components of the way I wanted to have a training done so that we could try to get to some consistency. Because I've sat with enough folks entering data in the system and collecting data incorrectly, that shared definition is the thing that creates consistency. So reliability. And this to me is I'll call it the VI SPDAT quandary. A client is assessed by one part of the homeless system, and the results should be the same in a different part. That has not bore out in a lot of cases. And I see Chelsea smile because I know exactly what Chelsea does up in her community. And this is what happens. People that work in homeless services will lead their clients to have outcomes that are better for their clients. That is understandable. Clients, once they understand the process, will do the same thing. So we have to find ways to mitigate that, or at least identify that it's happening and address it. Those are important, that reliability of information. And last, when an agency reports that they are exiting 75% of their clients to permanent definition, what does that mean? I'll just give you an example. We were looking at a community that had a bunch of shelters, and we're just looking at shelter data. And we saw this one shelter that was having great outcomes. Everyone was going to permanent housing at 30 days. Like, okay, cool, let's go see what they're doing. They were just exiting everyone to permanent housing in 30 days and kicking them out of the shelter. They weren't actually housing them, but that's what they were being told within their organization to have the outcomes that they needed to get the funding that they wanted. Well, it was easy to find because shelter, your success rate isn't going to be that good. Street outreach, your success rate isn't going to be that good. You're in crisis, your success rate should be lower. So having something that's all or nothing is definitely a flag. But if you see someone way outperforming, that's your opportunity to do one of two things: call them out on it, or figure out what they're doing and make sure everyone else is doing it too. And we've done that in certain circumstances. I think I've talked about this before, and this again goes back 15, 20 years. We as a community, one of the COCs that I worked in as the HMIS lead, we had an outcome measure that was really bad. Employed at exit, it was below the national average. It just wasn't good. So we started a consistency test on it really early on. Like, was it data collection? So we did some training, we did data collection, it went up a little bit. We then analyzed across system, all right, who's looking good? And we found a community partner that was doing it. They had made a partnership with an employment center and it was working really well. And we're like, oh my God, can you come to the COC and tell everybody this? How can we do this? Because every community has the same asset, we're just not accessing it. And when we did that, we saw in a year's time of going through this consistency thing of was it bad data? Okay, let's improve the data, let's improve education, find someone who's doing it well, and then propagate it. We found that we actually went from 2 or 3 points below the national average to 10 or 15 points above the national average. We could do this. We just weren't telling everyone how great we were at doing it. And that's what the data in HMIS can do. It can lead to good system change like that. All right. I feel like I can go on forever about consistency. There's so many components of it. It does feel like the most complicated one to me, and because there are so many components of it. So I just love to hear from y'all. If you have anything that's working well, something that's not working well in consistency, things that you've seen. Obviously, I know Chelsea's seen some inconsistencies with her CES work up in Yuba Sutter. But anything on the slide you want to talk about, I'd love to see it. And Alyssa, if there's anything in the chat, please raise it because I cannot see it. And why do the slides keep going back? I do not know. I don't want to tackle consistency.
I think one way you could look at it, this is something we should probably dig in, is seeing how people respond to the questions as they enter different agencies as well. And then, you know, like you said, for the one, which it's just so sad, don't mark somebody as housed if they really weren't housed, but checking to see if they're re-entering the system. You know, is that accurate? Like, we want to start checking for how often people state that they're getting housed and how quickly they're re-entering into homelessness as a way to evaluate our programs as well and their success. But, you know, to see, is the housing navigation working in the program that's doing it, but taking a look to see that consistency across the board, as well as measuring success and re-entry and back into homelessness.
Yeah. Thanks, Chelsea. You just triggered me from one of my earlier days. These pop up from time to time when people talk. As far as consistency goes, one of the things that I would notice, and I'll just take one example. One organization would always mark refuse or don't know for social security number, even though every other time I saw that client pop up, they were willfully and gleefully giving out their information to folks. So I knew it was guiding folks to the answer. That organization did not believe that social security number was important and would not let folks answer it. They would just mark it, and they likely wouldn't even ask. And they were easy to find when I started analyzing data, good and bad. I do wonder, and this is something that I think we'll see, you know, in the next coming years, what happens to the consistency of data collection around social security number as HUD has moved away from requiring 9 to requiring 4. That's going to be a fascinating consistency question that's going to be answered in each of your communities in very different ways. That was just one example. Alyssa, did that trigger anything for you? Because that was a kind of a throwback one from my mind.
Well, the conversation about full 9 to last 4 actually just came up in a different conversation I was in today. And, you know, it's not just around consistency and what that'll look like over time, But also there have been conversations around deduplication measures around that, because a lot of vendors use social security number as a marker, right? Because it is a very unique identifier for people. It's not foolproof by any means, but it is, it is fairly unique. It's more unique than, say, date of birth in and of itself in isolation. So yeah, I think the other piece, on the previous slide, those are really examples. And I remembered that the approximate date homelessness started was one that was just, it has been a pain point from the beginning of time because of the way it's worded, because of especially if you're in it, because I used to work at a shelter. And so the degree to which you can get really high quality data around that specific data point in a shelter is different than the degree of data quality you can get to that question at a PSH project, where you have established a relationship with somebody, and you can actually sit down and have a facilitated conversation about okay, when was the last time you were in a place that wasn't a shelter or wasn't the streets or wasn't an abandoned building, and having to think back and go back and go back and go back, and that takes time, and that takes even pulling up a calendar or thinking through important events in somebody's life. I couldn't tell you, I know when I moved into my house, because this is the first house that I've bought, but prior, if I were to go back in time of well, when did I move into that apartment or that apartment or that apartment? I have no idea. And I'm not, again, to Chris's point, I'm not in crisis, but time gets fuzzy very quickly, especially as you get older, just naming that. It's hard, it's really difficult. So that consistency piece, that was one of the biggest pain points for us around data quality was, we don't know that we can rely on our approximate date homelessness data. It's kind of up in the air about what that is.
I mean, to that point, every time I'm asked for a resume, I have to go to LinkedIn or a bio or something. I have to go to LinkedIn and even see my employee history, where I started, places. I don't remember those types of things. And that's just the way, that's the way the human brain works for some people. Some people can pull up every single detail and know, every place they were in 1994. I don't even know where I was in 1994, to be honest. So we have to account for that. Anything else on consistency? We do have some things, and I'd love to just get the open discussion as well.
I think something that I've noticed as well, especially since we've gone to a full share system in Butte County, is it really helps because I'm the intake person for my agency, and I'm the first contact that persons have when they're entering our agency. And when I'm doing their enrollment with us into our programs, I double check the other programs that they were in to see what their answers were. And I'm leaning more toward confirming that this information is still accurate rather than re-asking the question over and over and over again, because it's not trauma informed to continue to re-expose somebody to the same, because when you ask that question, have you been a victim or survivor of domestic violence, it triggers them again sometimes. And I don't want to continue to do that. And they'll change their answer, just because they don't want to think about it. And it's a protection, and it's not anybody's fault, but I'm leaning more toward just confirming that this information is still accurate to the best of their knowledge, and using that language versus when exactly did this happen, because that has a pressure all in itself, so really being aware of who is sitting across the table from me and doing my due diligence that is available to me with all my information, because HMIS does have a plethora of information and each agency doesn't gather the same information. There are some questions that are a little bit different, and they provide insight to each one of these people into seeing them more as just a unique identifier on HMIS and filling a grant requirement. It's about making sure that you are sitting across, assuring yourself that you're sitting across a person who's had life experiences and doing your due diligence before they even come to the table.
Yeah, I would like to say that I was a pioneer in HMIS in the early 2000s, because my data system in Baltimore County was wide open from day one. but I wasn't client informed. It wasn't about the clients. It was actually about lessening the burden on the providers because they were the ones complaining to me. I said, well, if you open it up and you're both seeing the same clients, all you gotta do is verify the data and you're on to the next one. That's how I sold an open system. If I were to do it today, I certainly wouldn't go that route. I would go the trauma-informed route, but it got to the same place, which is we're trying to be efficient. And there are inefficiencies in our systems, and everyone we take down, there's a better chance this client gets housed quicker. Chelsea, I see you off mute as well, and I just wanted to.
Well, I was gonna say two things. I like that idea. We have what we call our easy button, to where the information that's asked in coordinated entry, that you're able to use that and it transfers the HUD data over. And then we train to review, because obviously, when somebody comes in a coordinated entry, they might be willing to open up, might not be willing to open up in that first one, where they might, now that they're with another agency, be able to open up that way. But we also found that the wording of the questions, everybody interprets the wording differently. And unfortunately, some of the ways that HUD words the questions makes it difficult to understand. So we've really been working on how do we bring in wording that it's the same question across the board. Because it's amazing as sitting in trainings, hearing what people think the question means when it doesn't mean that at all. And so that's what we've been working on lately to help get those more consistent answers as well.
No, I completely agree, Chelsea. The way you ask it is so important because it does elicit a different response. And even then, I'm still going to my county person, Elisa Rawlinson, and asking her, like, am I asking this right? And I just recently found out that I didn't understand what that question about domestic violence really meant. And it could also mean if you were a child as well. And I did not know that. And so it's just these things that you really have to be proactive about. But I completely agree with you. We have to be consistent and understand the questions that we're asking and what we're looking for with that.
Thank you, Yesenia, and thanks, Chelsea. Chelsea, I just hope you don't get sued by Target for that easy button, or not Target. I guess it was, who was that? Staples. But I think I like the idea. It's brilliant. Diane, I see your hand up. Why don't you go ahead and unmute and speak your mind.
I'm sorry. Yes, I have to agree with Yesenia. This is one of the things that HMIS trained you on. You look to see what other programs and agencies the participant was in. Look to see if there's a lock on their information. That gives you the idea, or that tells you that there's DV in the past. So you need to be looking at all of the programs. You need to be looking for signs like this, so you don't have to ask the person again and again.
Absolutely. Re-traumatization is something that we do often in our industry because we're siloed. There's no reason for us to silo here. We can work together. Thanks, Diane. I really appreciate that. You got a high five from Yesenia.
I love that. Yeah, I love the dual benefits of a shared system, because to your point, I think, Chris, when we were initially messaging about having a shared system, it was from both perspectives, but depending on the audience, we would emphasize one over the other, right? So for providers, it would be like, well, you won't have to fill in as much data. That's a benefit to you. But also you're not having to ask the client the question over and over and over again. And to that point of re-traumatization. The other piece around that, I just completely lost out of my head. So that was great. If I remember it, I will bring it back up.
I find that you remember something as soon as someone else starts talking. So I'm just going to talk.
I just did. Whoever mentioned, I think it was Yesenia, were you mentioning like having conversations with service providers to ask them, how are you asking this question, and or how are you interpreting what this question means? Because otherwise I'm just making assumptions about what you think as a service provider the question means and how you are asking the question of the person experiencing homelessness. And so I think doing some of that information gathering to get a sense of how disparate are we in this question, like how many different definitions of this do we have, or how many different understandings of this do we have to be able to align, okay, let's get back on track with like, this is actually what we mean when we're asking this question.
Thanks, Alyssa.
Diane, do you still have your hand up? I can't tell.
She just left her hand up. I don't think it's back up. I will say that you all are consistently awesome because I know many of you and I've seen you at these trainings, and I don't get to talk HMS all the time like I used to. And this has been amazing. So I'm going to move us forward in the conversation because we do have a few more slides, and hand it to, actually, we have no more slides. We're just going to take the slides down. I was done with them anyways. There we go. I thought there were some examples, but we must have taken those out. So we now have a little less than a half hour to talk anything HMIS or data quality y'all want to do. I can't probably get too deep into the data standards changes. Alyssa probably can do a little better than I can, but we'd just love to hear anything around data quality HMIS that is important to you at the moment that we can talk through. And if there's nothing, we'll just obviously change. Now I can see the chat. This is all opening up my world. So anything y'all want to talk about? Anything you want to say, Alyssa? Because I just kind of took the end of that and ran right through it.
I really appreciate the discussion and like the different thoughts that you all have and your methods, the way you were measuring things. Are there anything that you would want to help or ask about related to things that you're struggling with? I mean, this could be a good peer-to-peer space too. Like, are there things that you just aren't working well that you would like to get recommendations, suggestions from other folks on this call about? Or us?
I know we're worried about the paperwork, the HMIS and getting into there on time. And that seems to be a struggle with a lot of people. It just, I don't know what the struggle is. I've been in this for 16 years. Before they split it all up, I was making phone calls. I was setting the appointments. I was doing the enrollments. I was looking for housing. I was looking for jobs. I was doing all this, and I kept my files in order. So I don't understand what the problem is at this time, because they have a lot less to do. And now that they only have 20 files, there should not be an issue with any of this. That's all I had to say.
And you're running into timeliness issues, Diane, like with the data getting entered in the system?
Yeah, because I'm in the compliance department, and it's not just the stuff getting into the system. It's the files not being put together correctly. I mean, we have our problem solvers, and they get everything together if it moves on to the FRTs, and they get the initial documents in that file, and that file's ready. We do a mini audit on it to make sure that they have everything in there at enrollment that needs to be in there, or they have a case note stating that this is going to be in there as soon as possible, But when it gets up to the case manager, it comes back to us a mess. So yeah.
I'm having that same issue, Diane. Honestly, I'm actually going to be doing like an internal audit on our resident files. I don't know. I know I came from county, and so our files had to be impeccable.
Yeah.
And it was very much stressed that it was my responsibility. These are my clients. It is my responsibility to make sure that these files are organized, information is accurate, and security. But I don't know why I'm struggling with that with my case managers.
Yeah.
I don't know how to change that conversation other than it's your responsibility.
Well, we do let the supervisors know
Yeah.
what's going on. Some of them take it to heart, others really don't. So it doesn't seem like the message goes from them to the case managers. But I feel as long as we're doing our job, and the monitors come out and there's something wrong, that I know I did all I could to
Right.
files right.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So but thank you for listening.
Thank you, Diane. Good to see you again this week. And Yesenia, thank you as well.
I had a question just has anybody worked with the HMIS lead to like really customize like their enrollment pages and things like that, and exit pages and case management and stuff?
I've tried to, but the supervisors, the way it's run here is the CEO says this is the job of the supervisors. They need to be doing this. So there's not much, that I'm able to do as far as that goes.
Because I've been working with Elisa in the IT department to really get like our programs, because I thought that was like a way to boost people going onto HMIS and documenting, is if some of the questions and information that they had to input were relevant to their case management and not just to meet grant requirements. So I put in a goal planning, and they're able to upload files and things like that, and general well-being questions and stuff. I just didn't know if anybody else had success with that or not.
We've been able to do that within our HMIS system too, to be able to build it and make it what we need. And so that's worked really great for a lot of our agencies. Some of the hard part though is when our agencies have to use multiple systems. I don't know if you have that issue. And so therefore they're wanting to put more into one system than the other. So we're also working on ways to get our systems to communicate with the right agreements in place to be able to make less work rather than more work, and to be able to have the data in one place.
Chelsea. Christina, I thought I saw you come off mute for a second. Did you want to share anything?
Yeah, I was just going to say that we do a lot of customizations in our HMIS too, but I think it's more of a vendor issue if your system allows that customization.
There's definitely different, how do I say this gently, different capabilities of different systems and how those can be configured. And I think we've seen those evolve over time. Some that when I used to run an HMIS, like I've run HMIS for 15 years. This is old school stuff. Weren't flexible at all, but they've changed their model. Now they are flexible. The data system I had used to be super flexible. Now it's not as much flexible. So it does a change over time as well. And we, need to recognize we've asked you as HMIS users, you as HMIS leads, vendors as HMIS, products to do a lot that is complicated. Coordinated entry, all these system performance measures, all these different reports, all these different workflows. It has become a very boutique, very complicated data system that we're all managing. And I think that, I do feel that because 15 years ago, it wasn't that complicated, to be honest. It was a little more straightforward. And I didn't do an AHAR. I didn't do LSA. I didn't do CES. All those things have come, and not a lot of capacity has come with it. And it has just been more things that pile on y'all as users and as agency folks and as system administrators and HMS leads. So just recognizing that there's a big lot of responsibility on y'all as a group of people. I did take a moment to put the DQMP link in the chat just so you can have that if you are interested. I didn't get it last time. So we haven't touched that in a couple of years, so I'm not sure if there's any plans to update this, or is it just static at the moment?
Oh, so that was actually fun fact about product development with HUD. Can I share that? we developed this back in 2018. It was actually started with a group of folks, and ICF crossed us over the finish line, and then it just kind of sat for a while, and then the pandemic hit, so it sat for even longer. And this wasn't actually posted on the HUD Exchange until 2022. I mean, it was several years after it had been developed. I would definitely appreciate being able to take a look at it again within the context of same thing with the data strategy, TA strategy that we were talking about earlier, within the context of equity, within the context of incorporating people lived experience of homelessness, within the context of just what we know more about things like the LSA, things like the system performance measures, things like vendor functionality. So it would be great. It would be great. I don't know if and when.
I forgot when it was posted because I was doing sessions on it NHSDC well before the pandemic. So
Yes. Yes. It was ready for prime time, but it wasn't posted until, oh, it says January 2021. So right in the middle of COVID.
good time to put something in. Any last questions, comments? Been a great group today. Just want to thank you for that. All right. Why don't we go ahead and end? Kim, would you mind walking us out?
All right, thanks, Chris and Alyssa. Thank you all for attending this California Housing and Community Development Workshop session offered through the Emergency Solutions Grant Coronavirus Relief Consulting and Staffing Services Contract. A 3-question survey will pop up as the session ends. Please provide your feedback so we can ensure these training sessions are as useful as possible. You all have a good day.